Mollie's differentiates itself by having a very food and beverage led proposition in terms of what we do. And we want to bring that sort of nostalgia, that slight sense of possibility and the open road and the adventure and the excitement of what it brings. And we think that sort of that diner concept represents that.
My name is Jessica Gillingham and I am the host of the Pillow Talk Sessions podcast. And on this podcast, I have conversations with leaders and we typically cover three things. We look at hotelization. We also look at how technology is enabling hospitality and changing hospitality. And then we also look at how hospitality and living is converging, how we're seeing a sort of a convergent of the living lodging asset classes. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Matt Bell, who is the Managing Director of Mollie's Motels. How Matt sees a brand that is, could typically be quite a transactional budget brand, how they've really positioned it to be luxe value and a very much an experiential, even destination brand. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Matt as much as I do. Thanks for listening. Before we sort of crack on, can you first please give our audience a little introduction to you and what your current role is and maybe a little bit also about your past?
Yeah, of course. Well, Jessica, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. Very excited to participate in it. So, yeah, my name is Matt Bell. I'm the Managing Director for Mollie's. Mollie's is a relatively new hospitality platform. We have three properties, hotels and diners across the UK. So what we want to do is create a hotel, a diner experience where affordable doesn't have to be boring. So great design, great food, great guest satisfaction, and that lives across both the bedrooms and the diner in terms of what we do. Prior to Mollie's, I worked with a group called Citizen Air. I was part of them for best part of 11 years, helped them grow from 3 up until over 30 hotels. And prior to that, spent some time always in the independent sector, groups hotels like Citizen Air. Sorry, start again. So with properties like Seaham Hall, was part of the opening team in the Great Eastern Hotel. So always tried to stay within premium, custom-centric products.
So that's a rich and detailed background in independent hospitality that you've got there, and I'm sure that that's brought a lot of your thinking and experience from the past will have come into what you're doing at Mollie's, from seeing how you're approaching Mollie's and also the core idea of it. And you did kind of give us an overview of Mollie's, but can you tell us a little bit more about the core idea behind it? Because what you're doing is something that is maybe potentially a fairly transactional stay and turning it into something quite different or looking at it differently when you say, you're at that budget end, but it's more an aspirational budget end.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we look at what happens within regional hospitality, regional hotels. We look at the Premier Inns and the Travelodges of this world that play within the budget sector. And they've done a brilliant job in terms of creating a very clear, understandable product for their customer. And I think they deliver very well to their promise. But we feel that there's a element of the transactional part within that. And whilst it meets that need, I don't think it really elicits a really positive emotion. That in a world where people have increasingly a deeper understanding of quality, they want quality, they have a certain taste level. We think there's a place for layering those elements of quality, that great design, and that deeply human relationship with the customer through that experience. So yes, we move beyond the transactional into a richer, more emotional state through our experiences at Mollie's.
So one of the topics that we talk about quite frequently on this podcast is hotelization and the hotelization of real estate. And what you've talked about there is a sort of an element of that. Like, it's not enough maybe today to just provide a hotel room or provide an overnight stay. Guests are wanting and expecting a more of an experience about it. So whether that experience might be because of the design that they have there, or the amenities that might be within the property or within the room, or whether it is just feeling that you're staying somewhere a little bit special, wherever that sort of lands on the price point continuum, feels like you're very much in that space with Mollie's.
That's definitely it. I think that there's definitely a place for the transactional, but really it comes into this notion of value and people's perception of price and quality. And we want to, and actually it's a similar position at Citizen M. We wanted to live above that price value line and that relationship. So we over deliver on that notion of value to the price piece. And we do that through a number of ways. We layer on different components to that. And we've touched on some, whether that be, Mollie's differentiates itself by having a very food and beverage led proposition in terms of what we do. We see ourselves having a strong diner product. It works very well for the local audience as well as residents. That differentiates us suitably from what you see traditionally in the budget sector, where they are quite defensive in terms of what happens from food and beverage. We're a very tech-led business in terms of what we do as well, and we believe that technology should be removing the friction from the customer experience. It really needs to add value to the customer journey within that space as well. And through that notion of great design and the investment in quality of what we have. So actually Soho House design have been fundamental in our journey so far in terms of the 3 properties and their involvement within it. So you get this very premium proposition, but all delivered at a great value price.
Can we talk a little bit about the food and beverage element that you have at Mollie's? Because you said there that you have locals coming. It's not just guests that might be coming and staying. And in a way, you've got sort of like you're building a destination F&B place. Is that what is that like the plan, or is that how it's kind of working out?
Yeah, so I think the genesis really with Mollie's was identifying and looking at roadside and looking at, I think maybe harks back to an era for those that remember sort of stopping at a Little Chef or a Happy Eater. And certainly when I was a kid, breaking up that journey with that kind of experience was always a bit of fun. But I think that if we look back on it now and ask, was it a quality product? I think probably we would say not. And so I think that there is a certain nostalgia to that roadside element. And actually also when you look at it within the sort of the US and the motel scene and the diner scene, there's quite an emotive part to what that diner represents as a moment and experience. And we want to bring that sort of nostalgia, that slight sense of possibility and the open road and the adventure and the excitement of what it brings. And we think that sort of that diner concept represents that part, large shape. So great, really indulgent burgers. And we want that food to be really sort of, welcoming and homely and comforting. And that plays well to a local audience as well. So destination, for sure, it is a place that people will go just to dine. How far they will travel just for that part? Well, hopefully more and more. Our burgers are really well recognized and well awarded and prized in terms of what we've done. So we think that will sell and drive it. But there is an element of it just being a convenience component in the location, but the quality is great. So I don't know whether our destination's quite strong in terms of what it is, but definitely there is a strong local pull to that audience, and I think that it helps position the hotel as well. That's certainly on the roadside. Manchester, which we've opened in the last couple of months, I think has probably a bit more of that destination pull in terms of what it looks like. We really believe that people will come and stay at Mollie's in Manchester for everything that product represents, as opposed to it being sort of a pit stop or a pause on a journey.
I just want to, when I was growing up, I never actually got to go to a Little Chef for a Happy Eater. I always wanted to. In my case, it was always homemade sandwiches in the back of the car and a packet of minstrels from the service station if we were lucky. But I totally get that it was, it was very much a sort of iconic, actually, in a way, those brands. And that is something we don't actually necessarily have, and certainly not in the way of the roadside side. But I want to go back to something that you've talked about. You've got your 3 properties at the moment. So you've got 2 roadside ones. I think it's Bristol or near Bristol and Oxford. And now your new in the centre of Manchester property. They're all a bit different, aren't they? Or certainly Manchester is different from the 2 roadside ones. Not just in the fact one's a city centre, the other 2 will, are on motorways or nearby motorways. How are you finding that, like the complexity and the nuances of having properties that are they're going to be catering to different customers, I'm going to presume, but also different kinds of properties that you might be operating. How are you sort of navigating that complexity, not just from a positioning perspective, but also perhaps from an operating perspective and even a marketing perspective?
So I think that, Mollie's certainly with the industry, and I think with those that sort of knew, would have put Mollie's, the first two properties, the Oxford and then Bristol, into that roadside category. And of course, when we talk, it's Mollie's Motels. So I think that roadside part for a lot of people framed what represented Mollie's. I think that all along what Mollie's represented as a brand was more than just a location per se. It's about eliciting that emotion. It's about how we connect with our customer. It's about what it meets for their individual need. And you say different customers. I think that it stretches our customer base for sure, but I think that there is absolute crossover between the two. The family that are traveling on the way down to the West Country and stop in Bristol might easily be the same that are going to a concert or a sporting event in Manchester. And therefore the brand carries. And I think that it's the resonance that it has, which is this notion of quality, that reassurance of the quality and the fit out, the design that is appealing and that resonates with you, coupled with the great value product. So I think that audience can be the same. I think the reason for going to the hotel to a certain extent might change a little bit. I referenced it before. I think the roadside has a certain element of a pit stop. It's a pause on a journey as opposed to the hotel being a destination. What we've tried to do is we've gone into Manchester and actually elevated the product within that. And that's a slightly opportunistic play that became with the site. But is to retain the fundamental DNA of what makes Mollie. So the classic room that we have is still visible and present, and we have out of the 106 keys, half of those are still the classic room that we have that you'd find in the roadside space. The diner is front and center of what we do, and the menu is principally the same across all of those components. That social space that's within the lobby is also identifiable. So I think there's both the tangible, the product components that are consistent, and I think the warmth, the welcome, the great design, and the emotion that it elicits, I think, is consistent across the product. So I think trying to shift a bit the narrative away from roadside, and because that's what sat in people's head, that's probably been the main challenge. But I think anybody that goes in and experience it will understand that they're in a Mollie's, and in a way that few hotels have that real strength of brand identity across the portfolio.
Absolutely. There's definitely a need for that, or a space for that, to have that strong personality brand that you've developed and are continuing to develop at Mollie's. I want to go back again now to something that you talked about sort of the essence, if you like, which is part of the core, and what you learned from your past experiences at Citizen M and then previous to that is around technology being a sort of a fundamental integral part of the brand, of the operations, of the experience as well. Can you tell me how you approach technology? Because also you have the benefit of being a startup, if you like, within the space, like a new brand coming out. And you will have had elements of that when you were at Citizen M as well. But how are you approaching your use of technology, the decisions that you're making when you're choosing technology? What's the priority for you as well? Where do you see technology being the most kind of fundamental in terms of moving a needle for you? How do you sort of look at this? I've just asked you a bunch of questions in one, which
it's a really big question, and I think that the essence of it is technology should be seen as an enabler in terms of what we do, and it can be a differentiator as well, and within it, but it is an enabler of what you're trying to do. So within Mollie's, technology is not our purpose. That guest experience is much more around, and delivering that value proposition is much more our purpose-orientated objective. But when we play within that budget sector, when we have to look at how we can bring those efficiencies to within our business. And technology is an enabler of that. It enables us to operate this retail-orientated model, much like Citizen M did, where we can really centralize certain technical expertise and have the teams focus on delivering guest experience centrally. So using technology to roll everything up into one common place is a really important part of our ability to scale and scale efficiently, which brings through the returns that might not otherwise be there on a when you're playing in the secondary and tertiary markets. So that's a really important component of what we're doing. It also, we believe, can remove friction. I reference this to the guest experience. And, the customer nowadays is only getting more and more tech savvy. They have access to that technology, and they live increasingly within their phone as well. So the idea that you are going to introduce hurdles to them through that journey, I think, is becoming less and less accepted by them. And so again, we have to look at where technology in itself enhances the guest experience, doesn't detract from it. So there's a constant line that we're walking between how we use technology to optimize the platform from an efficiency perspective, but also it's the and thinking. So the paradox, it's digital and human. So it's blending that component, so we never take away from those deeply human emotional connections we're able to establish with our customer, and enable that customer to use the technology to remove certain points of friction. And I think it's that constant relationship between guest satisfaction, the financial viability, and the third component to that we talk about is employee well-being. So how is technology supportive of the employee within that journey? How do we use it to raise them up as individuals, both from what happens within their employee journey per se, but also making sure those tools work so that when they are working and they are engaging with customer, that those tools really meet their specific needs as well. So it's a really big question, but there is no doubt, and no surprise to anybody that'll be listening, that technology is so fundamental today more than ever, but is extremely relevant for Mollie's in terms of where we seek to play, because it is such an enabler for us.
And it is, you talked about, those three areas of efficiencies, guest experience, and then team happiness, let's say, or team productivity. Maybe we could say that word as well. There's real kind of tensions there and friction between those three areas. How do you navigate those tensions? Like, how do you think about and navigate what might be a great efficiency driver, but might impact the experience of your customers, or something that might be really great for a customer experience, but be difficult for the team to do, or sort of not create the efficiencies? How do you sort of make those decisions and navigate the priorities there?
So I think that life is increasingly complex, and I think that we want to seek to simplify it to make it more easily understandable, and we can often therefore make it binary. We can make it either or, and the reality is it's not that. It is inherently complex, and that's one of the fundamental paradoxes of Mollie's is this value-lux proposition. So all the time we are looking at various initiatives that enable and thinking. It cannot be a zero-sum game where we sort of add to the viability, the financial performance, the efficiency component, and detract from customer experience. Or if you do, then you have to then look at what that looks like within the short term versus the long term in terms of what you're doing. So you are constantly trading off and balancing what that looks like. And I think that the deployment of the technology has to never again comes back to being an enabler of some of the broader components of what we're looking for, and that it is and thinking. If we simply detract from customer experience, but deliver efficiency, that doesn't work. It's not good enough. And so we challenge the teams to really look at the deployment of technology and these solutions in a way that raise everything up, add value into the ecosystem, as opposed to just creating a zero-sum game in terms of what we're dealing with.
So it requires a lot of strategic thinking, doesn't it? As well as a lot of, I guess, testing, as a lot of, what's the word I want to look for? But I guess it's making sure that everyone's on board with it as well, whatever decisions that you make, or when you're looking at problems, what solution? Consensus, that's the word as well. I guess you're also looking for consensus, aren't you?
Yeah, it's an interesting part because, we want to create we have a culture, a very progressive culture within Mollie's. It's a really important part that we're pushing the boundaries of what we're doing. We don't simply accept the status quo. As everything is moving faster and faster, if you do, then you're sort of lagging behind. So this race is just happening faster and faster. So we need a culture that is progressive in terms of what we're looking for. And we want people that are excited by the deployment of technology, and at the same time balancing that technology deployment for the sake of deployment doesn't necessarily create those outcomes. And the other component around it is with the complexity, is these things can become extremely big. And therefore your ability to deliver it effectively and well and see the returns can become quite difficult. So I think trying to make everything a little bit smaller, trying to look at how we can run smaller experiments constantly to see what wins, because very often you don't necessarily really know what the outcome is going to be. You might have a hunch, but sometimes you stumble across these things by running the experiments of where the win is and looking at the data and then taking something out from that is sort of this nugget that maybe was never your original intent, but is a key learning. So there is a process of, yes, it's quite an agile sort of approach to what you're doing, which is understanding what's going to deliver the maximum value, trying to make sure that you can deliver continuously, and that feedback loop ensures that there is a process of continuous learning and improvement in terms of what comes back into it within a culture of people that are progressive and understanding and working within that. So yeah, it's not an easy exercise. Getting the right people on board that want to play and can operate like that is a fundamental component. And then making sure that experimentation that you undertake doesn't have too big a consequences if it goes wrong, because then it removes the fear of failure. In fact, we can celebrate the failure because now we know what doesn't work. So it's an interesting component, and it's a fundamental piece to Mollie's. And as we grow, and as we look to build on sort of competitive advantage, we have to get better and better at this.
I want to talk to you in a minute about culture and how you work on that, how you get the right people that have those characteristics, being progressive, etc. But can we talk about failure for a minute? So when you mentioned, there's going to be lots of failure when you're iterating all the time, when you're testing things, when you're trying things, there's always going to be failure. But are there any failures that you'd be happy to share with us along that iteration testing journey? Is there anything that sort of stands out around things that just haven't quite worked, or big learnings that you've had from those kind of iterations that you might have done?
Yeah, I think I'm glad to say that none of the failures have been too big, shall we say? So I think that that's the important part, is that it's quite triggering, the word failure. And I use it we use it in both ways. So absolute failures that are so big that sort of hugely weigh on your company are a real problem. So you have to avoid creating those situations in terms of what you do. So when I'm using failure now, it's much smaller to that end of what we're looking for. So I mean, the recent deployment of our Apple Wallet key within the hotels. As we look at that journey, we spend time, we want to get it live. We've tested it within a sandbox type environment, and then we push it into the first, and you run your initial proof of concept, and then you might pilot this in an individual hotel and you think it's working, and then you actually do something and it's not. And so so your ability then to roll it out into your next hotel pauses for a moment. So your intent was to get it rolled out quickly, but there are learnings that happen because two properties aren't identical, or something actually wasn't quite lined up that you thought it was. But we have to accept that part, because if you don't push it forward, then you're forever waiting for it to be perfect. And by the time it is perfect and it's working, the world has moved on and you missed that opportunity. So I think it's really looking at that continuous component of failure. Apple Wallet Key might be an example of that. What we do with certain menu items within the diner can be that same component. You put something on, you think that it's going to work, it doesn't, so you take it off and you try and take what the learning is from that. So that's, for me, how principally we try to look at failure, which is not sort of launch it and then forget about it. It's launch it, see how it works. Does it deliver what you do? How can you refine it and learn from it on that basis?
Excellent. Can we go back to culture? Because you did talk about culture a little bit earlier, and about making sure that the team have got that. And actually, the way you're talking, you actually really remind me of a tech startup. Like I could be talking to a tech startup CEO or founder in a way, just in the sort of the approach, let's say. But in terms of getting the right people to join Mollie's, you've obviously got the people in the back, and developers you might have, all sorts of people in the back, but also your front end staff as well. What is it that you look for, and how are you maybe intentionally building the right people, the right team? Because I know at Citizen M, that was really important at Citizen M, had hosts, ambassadors right at the center of the brand to any guests that arrived. So how are you sort of doing that intentionally, or how do you think about it at Mollie's, building the right culture and the right people that then have become such a big part of the brand essence?
Yeah. So I think that it's about being very clear on your identity and what your values are as a business. And your brand is ultimately a very human thing. And there's an identity that comes with that part. And it's about how you make people feel. And you do that in lots of different ways. But one of the fundamental ways that you do that is human to human contact and what that looks like. So we don't think there's a perfect match for Mollie's and every single person that works there. But we have to find a strong enough overlap of those values, and people that share those values are going to sit well within our organization, and are going to thrive within that organization. And I think it's important that neither Mollie's nor the in the recruiting process, the recruiter and the candidate kid themselves to that end. So we understand that people think differently from us, and we welcome that. And sometimes it's important that we bring sort of different thoughts together within it, but where the values are still the same in terms of what it is. So your thinking preferences are different from your values. So we want breadth of thinking preferences so we can solve complex problems, but the values have to match through the business. So it's a very, of course, that there's an element that we're looking at the competence in the skill set that an individual needs, and at different roles, there's a different importance of what we bring in that area. But what is non-negotiable is that we carry the right values.
Excellent. And then in terms of scaling and growth of Mollie's, how are you thinking about and approaching that as well? Like replicating what you've already done potentially elsewhere. What's your view on that, and what's your don't need to give us your plans and your roadmap or anything like that, but what do you see as the opportunity, I guess, for Mollie's? But then also on the shadow of that, what's the challenge of scaling and replicating what you're doing, and how would you approach that?
So I think to answer that question in the whole is that for Mollie's to work, and for the play to work of this value-lux proposition within regional UK environments. And it's a different play from Citizen M, who put themselves in super prime locations in the best cities of the world. Interestingly, actually, Citizen M started out with wanting to be in secondary cities, probably not dissimilar from what Motel 1 have gone on and achieved, which is critical mass in primary but also secondary and tertiary cities. And Mollie's has to work within those secondary markets where the rates aren't there. What underpins all of that is having a very refined product, being very clear on what is core to what you're doing. And every time that you do something new or different or bespoke, that's time, effort, and costs in terms of what's going there. So our rollout is really based on having this very clear standardized product that we can then scale quickly in terms of what we're doing. And then by scaling quickly, growing quickly, but ultimately, as I said before, that we can add them all back up so we can effectively govern that centrally and realize that efficiency of the centralization part of what we do. We think, therefore, it's about does a Mollie's live ultimately? Where's the demand for a Mollie's? And that's therefore looking at where there is demand that really is 6.5 days a week. So we need strong corporate demand and strong leisure demand. We think that there are opportunities, with the Bristol location as an example, we're on Cribbs Causeway, so we're just off the M5, where we have residential stuff around us. We have good corporate business in around us. There are people that use us as a stopover, but also because they're coming to surf at the Wave. There's some people that are coming that are in Bristol itself, but are happy to be a bit further outside. So we get that blend of that business. Edinburgh Park is a site that we are just about to go through the planning process with. For us, it's a brilliant location. It's on Edinburgh Business Park itself, which is going through quite some regeneration. There's quite some residential stuff going in there. The AEG Arena, which is a new 8,000-seater arena that's going in that drives that demand. You've got some big blue chip companies in and around that area as well that drives the corporate demand. And this, it's on the Edinburgh Ring Road, but has good access into Edinburgh itself on the tram system. So 14 minutes to the airport, 14 minutes to central Edinburgh. So for us, we're trying to find these locations that really meet and tick as many of those boxes as possible. And that's the challenge. That's the hard part, in finding those where we know we can get consent fairly quickly, because we cannot be in this very slow, laborious development and bureaucratic phase of the planning process, and risk planning to that end. So we know the sites where we want to be. We know what the attributes are of those sites, but right now, as we want to do secure the next 2 to 3, that gets us to 6, 7 sites, that we want to make sure those sites are the ones that really amplify where we are. And as we build that critical mass, you can then start to look at the sites that may be a bit more marginal, because you're finding the efficiencies in the platform at that stage. So that's a bit where our journey is at the moment. Be really clear, really refine on what our proposition is and our product is, and be disciplined in that part. Be really targeted in where we want to be, and as we get to scale, realize that will start to unlock opportunity for exponential growth.
Firstly, I think some might argue that Edinburgh is a first city, not a secondary city.
No, I think that's fair. But I think what I'd also say is that the location itself is not central Edinburgh. So I completely agree. And it's a fantastic market for us. But the location is not right in the center of it. We are on the outskirts, on a business park.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I want to talk to you a little bit more about because you described Mollie's is, I can't remember the exact words you said, but sort of having that retail offering part of it. And I'm, that is from your diners and your food and beverage. Is there anything else that fits into that it's kind of a retail first offering? No,
and so when I say retail first, I think really what I mean is is the relationship between your central office and your product. So if you take a brand like Zara, the team that are within the shop in Zara are there to deliver the experience. They're not setting what the product is that's coming in. They're not determining what the price of that item is per se. They're just making sure that you as a shopper come in and have a brilliant experience, that the team members are in there and the shop is clean and runs really well. And then we can centralize, or they then centralize core components of that can be distributed across at scale. Hospitality, I mean, there's obviously the full spectrum of what that looks like, but the big brands don't own a huge amount of their real estate, and therefore within each individual site you've got specialization to deliver that product for the owner of that product that then has the HMA above it. And if we take that and bring that sort of consolidation together, you can spread that resource that currently sits on every site on a multi-site basis, and that brings some of the efficiencies that you're looking for, and specialization where you need it, as opposed to that fragmentation, that specialization. So that's kind of the retail orientated model that I reference.
Yeah, so literally it's a little bit like a high street shop that is part of a brand. There's the model that they have for, I guess, not distribution, but sort of I get it. I understand what you mean there.
And of course, within hospitality, what your difference is within a retail environment, I think, and this is changing, that the product that I consume in a retail, if I go into a fashion store, is the actual clothes itself, and which I take home. And of course, why would someone come into my shop? Yeah, if I've got a great shopping experience, I'm more likely to go back and buy my product there than it is. But fundamentally, the product that I'm buying is are the clothes that I'm going to take away with me. In hospitality, yes, you can talk about that as the night's sleep, or and a bit closer to the retail model is the food and beverage product in terms of what's in there. But there is so much more of a responsibility of the experience, because the length of time you're staying there. What you're buying is beyond the product itself. It is the physical product. There is an emotional part that's really relevant. It is that in terms of delivery of it, and then the freedom of the teams to really deeply connect with the customers, and that builds that relationship and that advocacy. Because the other component of the model is that we want our guests to be doing a lot of the marketing for us, and in that very social forward world now, that becomes a definite possibility of what you're looking to do. So that customer acquisition and growth is coming from a very social forward strategy of what we're within our marketing strategy.
Yeah, and I guess like retail, user generated content is very much kind of a route to a broader market. But just on the sort of the retail thing, so and used initially the example of Zara, and it's as a customer, if I like the product that Zara has and I feel like it meets me where I want it to meet me and I connect with it, I'll be at Zara in Edinburgh, I'll be at Zara and Cribbs Causeway in Bristol. Like, it doesn't sort of matter where it is. I will always be going to Zara as long as that product and I feel like the experience is a good one for me. So, and I guess it's the same with Mollie's as well.
I think it's that. And again, very much the same thing that we found within Citizen M. It depends what your driver is for the need of a hotel. If your hotel is supporting another element of what you're doing. I happen to be there on business. It sort of changes the dynamic. But I think certainly for, if I'm going to have a weekend away, knowing that there's a Mollie's within that city or in that location I can go to, that might start to drive a little bit where I want to be and what I do. So we recognize that it comes back to this original notion of sort of destination in terms of what we talk about. There is an element of what Mollie's will do in terms of the pull of what that looks like. But I think we also want that sort of reassurance that if I can stay at a Mollie's, then I will do. So there's a relief when if I'm going to Bristol, to know that there's a Mollie's there, or in Oxford there's a Mollie's there, as opposed to something that is new and unknown in terms of what I might get. And even within the brand in the big chains, you still don't quite really understand whether the product that you've had in one city is going to be consistent really somewhere else. So that brand reassurance, I think, is a really important piece.
Thank you, Matt. I've got one final question for you, and it's changing literally day by day how everyone's thinking about, talking about, and I'm going to say AI and AI agents and agentic AI. Where are you sitting? Like, how are you approaching AI? And I'm sure, like many, you've probably been using AI in elements of the business and automation for a long time. But what are you thinking about changing things going forwards, perhaps using more agentic AI alongside that workforce that you have as well? Where are you currently at on this?
Yeah, so I think we wholly embrace it. If you don't, I think our position would be that you're going to be left behind, because the momentum that is building here and the speed of competency of these platforms is changing exponentially. And so where there and rightly might be some skepticism at the moment of it, you see how fast it's developing, and its execution and deployment is only getting better and better. And I think that, as I said previously, that if we see technology, and we do see technology as an enabler, then as these new technologies emerge and as agentic AI emerges, we have to see it as an enabler for something within the business that is supportive of the broader strategy of what we have and what we're doing. And if I can meet that customer need better, faster, more efficiently using agentic AI, why would I not embrace it in its adoption, and all the time being clear? I think that there's agentic AI at play. I don't, when we are principally a human brand, you want to make sure that you know that when it's the human at play. So I don't think we're looking to dupe anybody in that area. But if it meets the need, perhaps on a more transactional basis, then why not embrace it? So the use cases for it are huge. I think all the time it goes back saying, okay, if I deploy it in a certain way, is it A, delivering me better guest satisfaction? Is it B, delivering me better profitability? And C, is it adding value into the employee journey in some way, shape, or form? And depending which journey you're exploring at that time, customer, finance, employee, whatever the different journeys are that you look at it, it's saying, how is technology and in this instance agentic AI an enabler of that? And one of the clearest things that comes out of it is simply speed. It's faster. It's not always right, and that needs to be refined, and that's the experimentation. But I think that if you are humble in its adoption, if you are aware of and critical in your thought around how it is done, not just accept it blanketly, then I think that you can really leverage it and have to leverage it, actually, so it's not optional anymore. But I think there's some real wins to be had through its adoption.
And it's, you talked about your three, I guess, founding principles of profitability, efficiency, guest experience, and then also team experience, making decisions based on the framework of those three things. And you just gave a really good example of that. When you're looking at AI or looking to change things or do things differently, or sort of map things against what you're currently doing, using that framework to make decisions.
Yeah, and I don't think it has to be all three all the time. So which you play on at different times. But I think that and if there is a trade-off, and it's just a repositioning of where you sit. But ultimately, I think that AI is transformational. It is a mechanism that will enable you to add that value into your ecosystem. And then, but the hard part is recognizing that is not the difficult piece. I don't think it takes a genius to understand that that's what's going on. The hardest part is its deployment, how to weave it into your business, sort of where we started this conversation, which is around ensuring that it is well adopted. Yeah, that's right now is a difficult piece. And at the same time, there is so much opportunity for deploy it that you could get yourself lost in doing everything but nothing at the same time. So again, this notion of discipline, understanding where to deploy it, where is it going to offer the maximum value? Have you got the right people that can embrace it? Are your processes supportive of what's happening to that end? Those sorts of notions are really important itself. Simply the deployment of it will not affect the transformation.